Flying aces. Who doesn't want to see something about flying aces? Hi, I'm Indy Nidell, and this is a World War II in real-time gallery special. Now, we haven't actually done one of these for several years, but I was at a bar in Stockholm, where I live, a couple weeks ago, and a guy asked me how come the World War II channel never really covered the World War II flying aces the way I covered them with the Great War. And I had no decent answer. So here it is. Today I'm covering 5 German flying aces of World War II. Will there be more such galleries covering more aces from other countries? I do not know that yet. Perhaps. I should also point out that 103 Luftwaffe pilots were credited with more than 100 victories, so don't think of this today as the full treatment of them. It is more of an inspiration to get you started so you can go and learn about all of the other ones. Where to begin? Why not with Erich Hartmann, the highest scoring ace of them all? Erich Alfred Hartmann was born on the 19th of April 1922 in Weissach-Württemberg into a Germany still reeling from defeat in the First World War. Flying entered his life early too. His mother was one of Germany's first female glider pilots and actually established her own glider club in 1936. Inevitably, Hartmann learned to fly as a teenager, earning his glider license before he could legally drive. By the time the Luftwaffe came calling in 1940, aviation was second nature. Hartmann's early career was uneven. He was disciplined repeatedly for poor flying judgment and overconfidence, traits that would later be refined rather than eliminated. In 1942, he was docked 2/3 of his pay for 3 months and confined to quarters for a week after performing unauthorized acrobatics over Zerbst airfield. His tale nearly comes to an end right here, but he actually may have unwittingly saved his own life with his impromptu acrobatic display. In his own words, "I had been scheduled to go up on a gunnery flight the afternoon that I was confined. My roommate took the flight instead of me in an aircraft I had been scheduled to fly. Shortly after he took off, while on the way to the gunnery range, he developed engine trouble and had to crash land near the Hindenburg-Katowice Railroad. He was killed in the crash." After advanced fighter training, Hartmann was posted in late 1942 to Jagdgeschwader 52, the Luftwaffe's premier fighter wing on the Eastern Front. It was here that he would spend almost his entire combat career, mastering the Messerschmitt Bf 109. He struggled initially though, including a disastrous first mission where he panicked and abandoned his squad leader, then mistook him for an enemy, and then rounded it off nicely by running out of fuel and crash landing. But under the mentorship of experienced pilots, he adopted a strict tactical doctrine. Close in unseen, fire at point-blank range, disengage immediately. No acrobatics, no dogfighting if it could be avoided. His kills would come from stealth and timing, not fancy displays of handling skill. Between November 1942 and May 1945, Hartmann was credited with 352 aerial victories, all but a handful against Soviet aircraft. This remains the highest official score of any fighter pilot in history. It must be said, though, that Luftwaffe victory claims, especially on the Eastern Front, are quite prone to inflation, and his are likely overestimated too. Even so, historians broadly agree that Hartmann's total was extraordinarily high by any standard. Hartmann became known as the Blonde Knight of Germany, though he reportedly disliked the nickname, and inside the Luftwaffe, he was more commonly known as Bubi, meaning young boy, for his baby face. In the final days of the war, Hartmann surrendered to the Americans, but was handed over to the Soviets under Allied agreements. He spent years in Soviet captivity, much of it in gulags, refusing repeated offers to join East Germany's Air Force. He would later be released and moved to West Germany in 1955. Who's next? How about Erich Rudorfer? Unlike many other aces, Rudorfer did not grow up immersed in aviation culture. He entered the Luftwaffe in the late 1930s and completed his flight training just as Europe slid into open conflict, joining the fighter arm as a relatively conventional young officer rather than a prodigy. Rudorfer's combat career began in the Battle of France, May 1940, with Jagdgeschwader II Richthofen. His unit provided air cover for Ewald von Kleist's panzer forces moving through the Ardennes forest. It's also around then that he got his first confirmed kill, downing a Curtiss Hawk 75 on May 14th. These early operations were costly, and like many Luftwaffe pilots of the period, he experienced a steep learning curve. He was shot down multiple times during the Western campaign and narrowly survived several engagements. In fact, over his career, he will end up being shot down 16 times and ejecting 9 times. That means his reputation came along a little more gradually, forged through experience, incremental improvements, and just refusing to stay shot down, rather than instant success. And actually, bit of trivia for you. If you ejected that many times in the post-war world, especially out of jet aircraft, there's pretty much zero chance of you being allowed back in a cockpit. If you know why, post it in the comments. Anyway, after a painful and drawn-out start to his career in the battles of France and Britain, he was transferred to the Mediterranean theater in late 1942, just as the Allies began Operation Torch. By now, his unit had gotten some of the latest variants of the Focke-Wulf FW-190, and was pretty much the best-equipped Luftwaffe fighter group in the theater. He only spent a few months there, but you can tell he was now really beginning to find his niche, claiming 26 kills total between November 42 and March 43. A majority of those claims come on just 2 days, actually, February 9th and February 15th, where he claimed 8 and 7 kills, respectively. Well, come June, he's hooked away to the Eastern Front, this time to command the newly established 4th Group of Jagdgeschwader 54. Here, he really started to shine. On November 6, 1943, he claimed a staggering 13 kills in a single sortie in a fight lasting just 17 minutes. Up until his return to Germany in late 1954 to train on the Me-262 jet fighter, he claimed another 123 kills for a total of 136 in the East. In 1945, in the West, he flew the Me-262 while in command of 1st Group Jagdgeschwader 7 and claimed 12 more kills here, mostly heavy bombers, for a total of 86 kills versus the Western Allies. That is 222 throughout the war if we're keeping score. We are. Rudorfer was not the highest scoring ace against the Western Allies, though. That honor goes to Hans-Joachim Marseille. The Star of Africa was born December 13, 1919 in Berlin, the son of a career army officer. He entered the Luftwaffe in 1938, but from the outset, Marseille was an awkward fit for military discipline. He was a gifted pilot, but reckless, argumentative, and frequently in trouble with superiors who described him as bohemian. Now, in the context of the time, that word means lazy, unreliable, and lacking proper respect. More than once, his career came close to ending before it had properly begun, with his family name doing some heavy lifting when it came to keeping him from getting discharged. Marseille saw his first combat during the Battle of Britain in 1940, flying the Messerschmitt Bf 109, which he'd ultimately fly for his entire combat career. And his early performance was unremarkable. He was shot down 4 times by the British, often because he had a habit of ditching his wingman and flying off alone. What his superiors did pick up on, though, was exceptional hand-eye coordination and spatial awareness. So, an ace in the making, just needing a little bit of help channeling that talent. Well, that came after his transfer to North Africa in early 1941, flying with Jagdgeschwader 27. Under the leadership of Edward Neumann, Marseille refined his technique and began to exploit his natural talent. Neumann saw how good Marseille was, but knew he needed a softer touch to bring out his best qualities, not rigorous and stern discipline hammering him into shape. Unlike many Luftwaffe aces, Marseille did not rely on ambushing his enemies by diving from above. Instead, he developed a highly aggressive, high-speed attack style, using flaps and throttle control and pushing his plane to the absolute limit to engage multiple foes each pass. In 1941 and 42, Marseille was credited with 158 aerial victories, 151 of those against Allied aircraft in the Western Desert, primarily British Commonwealth, and later American pilots. What sets Marseille apart is not just the total, but the context. His claims were made against well-trained opponents flying modern planes, in relatively clear airspace where overclaiming was harder to disguise. His most famous achievement came on September 1st, 1942, when he was credited with 17 victories in a single day, including 8 in one sortie, an unparalleled feat at this point versus the Western Allies. Perhaps the most remarkable thing, though, was his marksmanship. the average fighter pilot was expected to expend anywhere between 80 and 120 rounds of ammunition per kill, depending on their skill level and their experience. So how many did Marseille average? 60, 40, 15. 15 rounds per kill. Nuts. Unfortunately for him, and for the Luftwaffe, Marseille would not live to see 1943. On September 30th, 1942, the cockpit of his Bf-109 began to fill with smoke while returning from an escort mission. After his group got over friendly territory, he tried to bail out, but being effectively blind, he could not tell that his plane was already in a dive. He exited the cockpit and was yanked upwards and backwards by the air resistance, as you would expect, right into the vertical stabilizer of his plane, the little fin atop the tail. The impact either killed him instantly or knocked him unconscious, and he fell to the desert below. Our next hero, General of the Fighter Arm Werner Mulders, died in a plane crash, but not in battle. In November 1944, World War I German ace Ernst Udet, who by then was Luftwaffe Chief of Procurement and Supply, and was blamed time and again by Hermann Goering for all sorts of failures, committed suicide, though the press said he died in a crash. And Werner Mulders, as a passenger flying to the funeral, was killed when the plane crashed. Interestingly enough, when Mulders transferred from the army to the Luftwaffe in 1934, the doctor examining him told him, "You're not fit to fly." He was much mistaken, although it took many months to overcome his almost constant motion sickness when flying. However, within a year of beginning training, he was already an instructor. In 1938, Mulders went to Spain to serve with the Condor Legion, supporting Franco in the Spanish Civil War. In July, he scored the first of his 14 Spanish aerial victories, the highest scoring German pilot there. But as good as he was as a pilot and shooter, and as a leader and organizer, probably his greatest achievement in that period was as a tactician. Together with a few of his fellow squadron pilots, he developed and put into practice the Finger Four fighter formation. The Finger Four has been used by fighter pilots in air forces the world over since the Spanish Civil War. After the end of the Second World War, the US Air Force began referring to the German-invented Finger Four as the double attack system. You can look up for yourself exactly how the Finger Four works. When World War II rolled around, Mulders kept racking up the kills. However, he himself was shot down over France and was taken prisoner, but was released 2 weeks later when France surrendered. In October, he became the first of the new crop of pilots to reach 50 victories. He passed the Red Baron's record of 80 kills June 30th, 1941 in the skies over the Soviet Union, and in mid-July became the first pilot in history with 100. The accomplishment brought him the award of the Diamonds to his Knight's Cross, the first German soldier so honored. With the award came the order from Reichsmarschall Goering expressly forbidding Mulders from flying any further air combat missions. He did continue to fly them, but infrequently, and at the age of 28, he was appointed General of the Fighter Arm on August 7th. Thereafter, he devoted much of his time to the development of the Forward Air Controller concept, another pioneering idea he devised. That's what he was doing before his fatal flight a few months later. Each morning, he would fly over the front, land his plane and hide in a foxhole, and then direct the incoming pilots over his radio to the enemy positions. In the evening, he'd fly back to base and make a daily report. These were no longer combat missions, but of combat missions, Werner Mulders flew 330 of them, and he scored 115 aerial victories. I will end today with another general of the fighter arm, but one who survived the war, Adolf Galland. Galland became general of the fighter arm before he was 30. He is probably the only man to handle high command and acedom simultaneously. He meets the two basic criteria of genius: capacity to probe deeper and see further than his contemporaries, and ability to give effect to this insight in a practical way. He will be as long remembered for his battles on the ground, as the advocate of the fighter pilots in high councils, as he will for his 104 confirmed aerial victories. I mentioned Galland several times in the regular series when covering the Battle of Britain, in particular when he was at odds with Luftwaffe boss Hermann Goering. Galland was, in fact, one of the few officers who stood up to Goering, and he and many of the other elite young officers felt that Goering's mindset about aerial combat and strategy was hopelessly outdated, Goering having been a flying ace in the Great War, and was completely out of touch with aviation development. Eventually, Goering would come around and purge the Luftwaffe of World War I era leaders and pilots, but that was just a band-aid by that time, not a cure. The Galland family, going back, were originally French, but fled religious persecution in the 1700s and settled in Westphalia. Adolf was born in 1912, and already as a teenager flew gliders and then was a glider instructor. Then he was one of 20 out of several thousand applicants accepted at the Lufthansa School for Pilot Training, graduating in 1932. When he joined the Luftwaffe, though, he was injured so badly in training that he was in a coma for 3 days, and his eye was injured badly enough then, and again in another crash, that he memorized the eye chart to pass his next physical. Like Werner Mulders, Galland flew for Franco in the Spanish Civil War, but unlike Mulders, was not famous there, flying pretty much only ground support in obsolete biplanes. The two men did become fast friends there, and it was there that Galland first painted Mickey Mouse on the side of his plane. When asked why, he simply said, "I like Mickey Mouse. I always have." His experience in Spain came handy in Poland in 1939, getting him the Iron Cross Second Class, but Galland wanted to get away from ground support, so he faked an illness and got a doctor to declare no more open cockpits for you, and from then on he was a fighter, a hunter. In May 1940, he got the first of those 104 career kills, shooting down 3 British Hurricanes in one day. By October, he had won the Knight's Cross to his Iron Cross and the Oak Leaves, only the 3rd German soldier to be honored thus at the time. Galland had 2 brothers who also flew with the Luftwaffe, and both of them died in the war. Yet in 1941, he managed to survive being shot down twice in the same day. By 1944, as such a prominent pilot and leader, he was often blamed by Goering and even Hitler for Luftwaffe failures, and in January 1945 was relieved of his command. However, he was soon flying again, ending the war leading a squadron of Me-262s, the first operational jet fighter. Adolf Galland died in 1996 at the age of 83. So there you have it. 5 big names, arguably the big 5 of the German World War II flying aces. These guys were also all pretty distinct from each other in both actions, temperament, and style. But one thing you must take away from this episode, perhaps the one thing, is that for whatever honor, decency, or nobility these men may have possessed and may have exhibited, these 5 were personally responsible for many hundreds of deaths, possibly as many as 1,000, for that is what happens in war. Many people are killed, and there rarely is anything decent about it. If you enjoyed this gallery special, well, we know you enjoyed this gallery special, but let us know in the comments, and perhaps there will be more of them in store for you. Who knows? But for ever more great content from us, join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. That'll do it. These are the newest commissioned officers in the Army, and Philip de Goey is the channel's Army Member of the Week. See you next time.